the human cell is not living. I mean, he would have also said, I believe, genetics are not living. It's what makes up that genetic. And so now we have a lot of conversation about something that I do have some expertise in, and that's publishing the biochemistry of the interstitial fluids and how it's affected by what you eat, what you drink, and what you think. Even what you inject, not just ingest, but what you inject. How does that affect the epigenetics, which epi means outside the genetics? How does that affect the genetics? Because when you inject any foreign substance, especially from a bat, a mouse, a monkey, or an aborted fetus, the body does what it's supposed to do, just as if you were bitten by a snake and venom was released. Once that's injected into the serum, you induce a reaction. And that reaction is not just with the white blood cells, because Judy mentioned it. It was the death of the red blood cell. Red blood cells in number, if you want to quantify this, for every 5,000 red blood cells, there's one white blood cell. 5,000 to 1. And guess who takes up the poison from the rattlesnake? Guess what cells take up the poison from the injections? Guess what happens to the hemoglobin of a red blood cell, which is the molecule of that cell? And if you're doing blood counts and you have the license to do those blood counts, you can see what happens to the by quantifying it. You can see a reduction in red blood cells. You can see a reduction in hemoglobin. Isn't that what happens when patients with cancer receive chemotherapy, which is chemical poisoning? What cells take that up? White blood cells? No. They're responsible for collateral damage. Red cells pick up all the waste. That's why they're called Heinz bodies, the crystallized red blood cells. And in the report that I did, scanning and transmission electron microscopy in the identification of the non-disclosed ingredients in the COVID, 1, 2, whatever you want to call it. These are just the diseases. They don't represent anything other than that. But in the vaccines, you'll see red blood cells that literally have taken in that poison and have been crystallized and literally cracked red blood cells, black red blood cells, no longer red when they're exposed, but black. They literally absorb. The number one, as far as third anatomical elements, you have microzymium, which means the small bean or intelligent bean or the dust particle that makes up all cells. The other two are white blood cells, red blood cells. That's simple. That's why it's called the blood, the third anatomical element, which has never really been talked about much. So when Judy talks, I just change my thought processes to foreign entities from concoctions, which are Frankensteinian, which create human immunowimpos. And they call that AIDS.
Mm-hmm. You destroyed our immune system.
It's not AIDS, it's human immunowimpos that have been poisoned by what? Rattlesnake venom? Because that's exactly what it is. It's Frankensteinian. Mm-hmm. So this whole idea, in my mind, doesn't make a lot of sense when I'm looking at it at the molecular level, when I'm looking at it at the atomic level, when I'm looking at it, the only thing that makes sense is this food going to poison me or is it going to help build blood? Because I didn't say it, Hosea said it. For the life of all flesh is the blood, period. I take him for what he didn't see under the microscope. I take it for those words. He said, blood is flesh, flesh is blood. If you're eating the flesh of an animal, you're eating the blood of an animal. That's foreign, and it's rejected. It builds nothing. Nothing. So I take Hosea, I take Moses for his word when Moses said, and the reason I quote scripture,
Me too.
because what happened in the wilderness after they saw a miracle of the parting of the sea, what happened in the wilderness is people wandered around, you know, this idea, that idea. When are we going to go to the promised land? We've been here, you know, when's Moses going to take us? Yeah. Moses never did take the children. And over 1 million people died in the wilderness. Not a single soul, correct me if I'm Dr. Mary, I think it was Joshua that actually went to the promised land. Not a single soul that came out of Egypt. They all died and suffered in the wilderness. And that's exactly what is happening here in the United States. People are wandering around saying this and that in fear, with lack of faith and understanding, because Moses got to the point, as many of us get, and we go, my people perish because of ignorance, because of stupidity, you know, because they don't know. They don't know. And a voice like Judy, a voice like Sherry, a voice like Mary, a voice like, don't want to leave you out, Noel, because I appreciate what you said. I said, when you stand up and speak truth to those who don't know, or to those who are deceiving those who don't know, those speaking truth to power, you know, when I hear Rand speak, he's speaking truth to power, but he's not using the power that he has. Maybe I'll forgive him for that, because he's doing the best he can. To assemble a group of people to make change is not easy. It's getting a lot more easy now, because more and more people are waking up to the fact that the inoculations is nothing more than a Frankensteinian concoction that is poisoning people, polluting the interstitial fluids, causing cell membrane breakdown. So they're cytotoxic, gene mutation, which is genotoxic, and then the ingredients implanting in there antenna, transmission capability sensors with a base of graphene to connect you to the Internet of Things. And this is what we've identified. We've identified these poisons that are being delivered by an mRNA delivery package that have specific instructions based on their encrypted memory, are being driven specifically to reproductive organs, to the heart, and to the brain, with intention, and have been tracked by using radioactive isotopes to make sure they go where they're supposed to go. And that's what the mRNA is doing. That's the software that's driving the capsid, the lipid capsid. And contained with that is the venom that's being directed to a woman's ovaries, to a men's testicles, to the heart. That's why we're seeing cases of myocarditis, to the brain. So maybe I went on a little bit too much, but what I wanted to say is first off, is I'm grateful today. I want to thank God for these blessings, and to have blessings of women like yourself. It makes me more courageous to speak. You know, I'm grateful for that. I just want people to simply understand one other metaphor, and I call it the fishbowl metaphor. And I've used this quite a bit. I think you got the snake metaphor, right? You don't want to inject, you want to ingest. But you better find out what is in whatever you're ingesting, because it could be laced with glyphosates, or that food may be genetically modified. that can release these anatomical elements which are foreign, that of course what has to happen is the blood has to deal with it. Red blood cells, then white blood cells, not white blood cells, then red. So if it skips over the red blood cells to the white blood cells, you know that you seriously just poisoned yourself, because their responsibility is to release reduced oxygen, reduced hydrogen particulates to neutralize the waste or the poison that's part of that. But anyway, the neutrophils, they pick it all up. But back to the metaphor, it's called the Fishbowl Metaphor, and it really deals with the theory of epigenetics, which is what is important, the dis-ease or the environment in which the dis-ease is expressed. And so I've said this many times, is that disease is nothing more than a symptom of a polluted environment. The question is how are you polluting it? Are you polluting it with alcohol? Are you polluting it with AZT? And I lost a nephew, a dear nephew, with AZT, because he was labeled HIV positive, which is a fake diagnosis. So they put him on AZT, and he was dead 6 months later. And I begged my sister, please do not do this. And she didn't do it, and she never got over that. And she died prematurely just because of the burden that placed on her heart. So I know all about AZT. I know I got into this thing in the early 80s. So I know the Fauci, just like Judy. Judy's more, in touch with Bob Gallo and Anthony Fauci, and had the wonderful privilege of meeting Luc Montagnier as keynote speaker in Milan, Italy, as an exile. Yes, an exile. He working now in Shanghai at the Shanghai University. Because, well, I guess the polite way is he couldn't get funding. No, they took his funding away. The guy was saying, you can't go off the reservation. You are no.
He isolated it, and he said it didn't cause. He isolated LAV, lymphadenopathy virus, a very slow growing virus that what Noel said at the very beginning of the show, if you have a healthy immune system, it's a nothing. He said in our book, Ending Plague, in that last interview that published last August, he said in that interview, we all have LAV sequences, and that's in that endogenous genome, virome, that we now know is 10% of our DNA. We know 97% of our messenger RNA is not translated into protein, but is regulatory. So exactly what you're saying. So he said only, and since 2010, he showed all the other microbes. He showed everything that you just said. So he was exiled. He was exiled, a Nobel laureate, because, science is never settled. And we learned his work said